Hey everyone, I'm here to talk about the first book from this collection, which is The Study in Scarlet, Sherlock Holmes. I guess it's the first Sherlock Holmes that he wrote. I assume that because it's the first in the collection, but I guess I don't really know if that's true. But it felt like it was. So I guess I'll split this into two parts because the book had like a part one and a part two, and the two parts of the book were they felt like two different, entirely different books, and so it makes sense sort of to split them in half. So yeah, I guess I'll start with the first half. Immediately, so the story's told by Watson. I guess people that have read Sherlock Holmes before probably know that a lot of, or maybe all of his stories are actually written from Watson's perspective. I didn't know that. I'm new to reading. This is my first Sherlock Holmes book. But anyway, immediately, page one, we have British imperialism, colonization right away. Watson gets injured while he's fighting, I guess, or no, he's a medic in the second Afghan war, and he's like immediately injured and sent back home. And there's lots of first of all, there's lots of racism, but there's also just lots of hints at British imperialism peppered throughout this book in a way that is very backdrop, like ambiance of, I don't know, ambience not the right word. Yeah, I don't know, whatever. Background. It's background of British imperialism, and it's very much like reading a primary source document of like how British people conceived of imperialism as like, oh yeah, that's that thing that's happening over there, because it's like talked about all the time in this book, or it's not talked about, but it's mentioned all the time in this book, but never talked about and never in the forefront, in a way that like if you read a modern book now that talks about imperialism, like it's talking about colonization, it's talking about imperialism. It's not like something that's happening like the weather is happening, but that's how it felt in this book. It's like the mentions of it felt like you talk about the weather, which was upsetting, but also informative to, well, I don't know, it just gave me like a window into how I guess it must have been conceived by like, white British people living in Britain. So that was kind of wild. Okay, so there's that. Then with that, there's a lot of racism. Just lots of peppered random stereotypes throughout. In the first half of the book, it's not a main focus. It's just like these little throwaway racist comments. There's a mention of when he's in India, he gets sick, and he says this thing he calls the fever that he got, that curse of our Indian possessions. So that's disturbing. Lots of different racism against Arabs, against Indians, then like weird xenophobia. The one cop was definitely supposed to be Irish, and they're definitely making fun of Irish immigrants there, and then anti-Semitism is happening, little peppered, just these throwaway comments. The second half of the book has a much bigger racial issue than the first, but first half was more like these little throwaway racist comments. So there was that, and it felt very different to me than the Agatha Christie book that I read, that made me ultimately decide I'm never reading her again, because she felt, to me, the book that I read, and maybe it was just what I read, she felt like she was obsessed with racism, and like there was like an intention behind it that to me felt like I could not do it. I couldn't do it. This also major problem, but maybe it's worse that it's an afterthought. I don't know, but it's like these little. It's the same way that he's talking about imperialism. It's like these little throwaway, racist comments, like that one that I just said. So that's a problem. What else about this? Okay, well, I guess I'll just talk to you about what happens in the first book. So basically, in the first book, this is when Watson and Sherlock Holmes meet for the first time. They become roommates for the first time, and they investigate their first murder. Basically, this guy has been killed inside this house, but he doesn't seem like he was strangled, and there's no evidence of blunt force trauma, so they're trying to figure out how he's killed, and ultimately they figure out he was poisoned, and then they catch the guy who did it. But the mystery part of it was awesome. I really loved that. It's good. I see why I understand. Now that I've read Sherlock Holmes for the first time, I understand. It's good. It's very good, and it's very spooky and melancholy. It's kind of very Poe-esque and atmospheric and fall spooky vibes. I'll read some quotes later, but that part was really, really fun. So that was cool. And then some other things I wanted to talk about for this. It seems like the author doesn't like cops, which is cool. I like that part. There's a lot of making fun of cops in this book, which, I mean, he's still a detective, so yeah, detective, I don't know. But, and he's working for the cops. But, just the cops are just, their characters are meant to be laughed at, all of them in different ways. And then one of them, who's the clerk or whatever, is painted as very callous and not caring about people that are having very real problems, in a way that resonated with me, as being true. So that was cool. I liked the anti-cop, narratives that we had there. Some other things I really liked the men in this book. I liked the representation of men in this book, which I don't know if I really think about how men are represented very often. I guess it's not something I think about very often. But their friendship, which doesn't start as a friendship, but it starts to blossom, first of all, was really fun to read and cute, very adorable. And they speak a lot to each other about their depression, and both of them talk about periods of depression that they go through. And I just thought that was really beautiful. And the one guy's kind of, at one point, he's warning, Sherlock Holmes is warning Watson that he goes through these depressions and don't take it personally. And that he knows he's going to come out of it. And I wasn't expecting that from a British white book of this time period. I was surprising to me. And I think it goes to show, how our understandings and expectations and rules about gender change over time to a point where, I just assume that in the past, in Western culture, it's always been this way, and it's just gotten slowly less restrictive, but that's not necessarily true at all. I mean, this is just a case study, but based on this, the norms, at least in the United States culture, got stricter before they have only just started to get less strict about men talking about being sad or depressed. So that was cool. What else? We had some sexism, definite sexism issues peppered throughout in a very similar way to the other issues I mentioned. A lot of peppering of hatred throughout this book. And like with the other ones, it's in the form of weird racist or sexist caricatures. Sorry, my child woke up and wanted some water. But yeah, okay. So you have this this peppering of sexist characters throughout the first half of the novel. So you have an old crone who's literally referred to as a crone character. Then there's a comment about women being super vain and like obsessed with their own beauty and obsessed with people complimenting their beauty. And then there's a woman who is sexually harassed by the guy who ends up getting murdered. And she has to, like, her honor has to be defended by her brother. And it's very clear and it becomes very much more clear in the second half that the author cared a lot about sexual harassment and sexual assault of women, which is nice. But then his ways of expressing that were problematic. A lot of, like, woman is victimized and then man is upset about it and gets vengeance. So that's an issue. Okay. And then, yeah, I guess I'll just read some of the parts from the first book that I really liked, and then we'll switch, the first half of the book, and then we'll switch to the other half of the book. Okay. Oh, so I really like this part. This just shows, like, his writing ability is really strong, because he's able to show us, not tell us, what people look like. So he doesn't have to do these, like, introduction, like, he was a squat man, and, like, none of that. It's all shown to you through action. So, just in this, how are you? He said cordially, gripping my hand with a strength for which I should hardly have given him credit. So to me, that quickly communicates this is somebody who's very strong, but who doesn't, quote unquote, look strong, or doesn't, fit the archetype of what we think a strong man looks like. So that immediately, like, put a picture in my head, without you having to describe their appearance to me, which I, like, right away I was like, okay, this is a writer who's talented. I like the part, there's a couple parts where they talk about their depression, but for this one it gives you that, like, fall or just dreary, almost like England, fog, wet, damp vibe, but while they're talking about their depression, and he says, for the dull weather and the melancholy business upon which we were engaged depressed my spirits. And I was just impressed with, like, the mental health talk, and then it coupled with, like, how the elements affect them and the work that they're doing affects them, because I feel like there's this weird lie about people that do traumatizing work not being affected by it, and it's like, no, of course you're affected by it. This other part I thought was kind of beautiful, even if it was overdone. It was, like, spooky and fun and beautiful. The latter looked out with 3 tiers of vacant melancholy windows, which were blank and dreary, save that here and there a to-let card had developed like a cataract upon the bleared panes. I thought it was beautiful. It reminded me a lot of Poe, and I guess Poe actually had a detective character that a lot of people compared Sherlock Holmes to, which he references in this. So he knew that and acknowledges it in here. Yeah, other spooky parts. I followed him with that subdued feeling at my heart, which the presence of death inspires. It's just, like, overwrought in a way that I really love. On his rigid face there stood an expression of horror, and as it seemed to me, of hatred, such as I have never seen upon human features. He's talking about the face of the dead, of the murdered guy, who, by the way, was a creep and should have been murdered. Okay. That's fine. Let's see, what else did I want to share with everybody? So sinister was the impression which that face had produced upon me that I found it difficult to feel anything but gratitude for him who had removed its owner from the world. Again, just spooky. An assumption there that the murderer's a dude, which was a dude, but okay. So that's sort of it for the first book, and then let's talk about the second half of the book, because the shift from book 1 to book 2 was like wild, just wild. Okay, so book 2, I'll just give like a synopsis. Book 2 is the backstory. So in book 1, they capture the murderer. Okay, the murderer's been captured. The mystery of who did it is solved, but we don't know the motivation. Book 2 is the backstory, the motivation for our murderer, and it is an excuse for the author to just tear apart the Mormon Church. Like, he had very strong opinions about the Mormons, apparently, which is not something I knew about him. And he really just used the second half of this novel to just, like, rip apart the Mormon Church and all the things that he thought was horrible and terrible and bad about them. And so the story is our murderer, actually, before the murderer even arrives, the second half of the book starts out, there's a little girl and an old man in the middle of the desert, out west, stranded. They've been walking for days. They're lost. They were with the caravan. Everyone in the caravan died. The only survivors is the little girl and this old man. They're not related. They've been traveling. They have no food. They have no water. And they're pretty sure they're going to die. And so they go to the top of this little plateau thing. And they fall asleep. And they're like, they do their last prayers. By the way, it seems like if this book, one book by this one author, is any measure, it seems like British people just thought we were obsessed with Jesus, like Jesus freaks. That's the vibe this gave me, that they just thought the United States was totally Jesus freaks, which, yeah. So anyway, so they say their prayers and then they go to sleep, and the girl's cool. Like, this little girl, at first I was like, oh, there's gonna be like, and she's blonde, obviously she's white. So I'm like, oh, it's gonna be this very annoying, like, sad kid thing, but like, she was very spunky and I kind of liked her right away. And the older guy's like kind of more scared than she is, and she's just kind of like, it's gonna be fine, we're gonna like die and see our families, it's gonna be great. So anyway, they go to sleep thinking that they're not gonna wake up, and then the Mormons, after having been kicked out of like their 50 billionth place that they got kicked out of, before they go to Utah and found what is it, Salt Lake City, I guess, before they found their little land of Mormons, they're on their journey and they encounter this old man and the daughter, and instead of just rescuing them like normal people, they go and they ask the guy in charge, and they're like, should we leave them to die or should we save them? And then they basically are like, we will save you if and only if you agree to be Mormons, and you have to follow all the Mormon rules, and if you don't follow them, something bad is going to happen. So they're like, yeah, we're not going to, beggars can't be choosers, we're Mormon, great, let's take us, please save us. So they go with them, they live there, the old guy like legally adopts the girl. Fast forward, he's done pretty well for himself. They have like a really big farm and he's wealthy and whatever. And the girl falls in love with an outsider. So there's an outsider guy. This is where the intense racism really pops up, because the guy she falls in love with was like raised by indigenous Americans, which is like this, it serves as this double-edged racism, because on the one hand there's lots of like deeply hatefully racist, savage shit, just like they're angry and violent. So there's that happening, but then there's also like the stoic and principled and like righteous thing, stereotype, caricature that's happening too. And they're embodying this character who is not indigenous, but he was like raised by indigenous people, so because like, God forbid a white girl date an indigenous person, so instead she's dating a white person but who's like similar to indigenous people, so that's like a whole mess. But anyway, so she falls in love with him. He seems like a good dude. The dad's into it. He's like, sweet, I was wanting her to marry for love, and I refused to let her marry a Mormon because they're horrible, terrible people, basically, is the dad's opinion. And she didn't want to marry one anyway. She falls in love with this guy, so they're like, okay, sweet, we're gonna get married. And then he goes to make some money for himself before they get married. And then he's gonna come back for her once he makes some money. Meanwhile, the Mormon church is like, no, you promised that you were gonna follow the rules. Otherwise, we would have left you for dead in the desert. And the rules say you need to marry your daughter off to one of the Mormons. And they, they're polygamists, and so they have, a bunch of them have many wives, and it's not like, I think people know about Mormons and polygamy, but in case you don't, it's not like polyamory. It's like a situation in which women are being trafficked, usually. Or at least sort of hoarded and, made to have 50 billion children. So anyway, the dad and the daughter are like, no, we're not doing that. She doesn't want to marry anybody. She doesn't want to be one of many wives. She's not attracted to any of these people. That's not happening. And they're like, well, if you don't do it, something really bad is going to happen. And they start this countdown where they're doing like graffiti on his house every single day. And they're like, you have 30 days. Otherwise, something really, really bad is going to happen. And then there's lots of parts of the novel where it's just the author. It's not even plot. It's not even story. There's no characters. It's just the author ranting about some of the bad things that the Mormon church has done. So it's talking about like disappearing people. Like anytime anyone speaks out against the church, like they just don't come home one day. Or they talk about I guess they're called the Avenging Angels, but they're like these bands of Mormon men that would go out and kidnap women from other non-Mormon camps and like traffic them and steal them, and force them to be wives. And so just really a lot of second half of the novel is just like devoted to this non-narrative, non-literary, very rant-like just takedown of the Mormon church. And then ultimately what happens is that she escapes with, her lover. They run away. So does the old guy runs away with them. Then the lover goes to find some food. One day when they thought they were safely away, he comes back. The dad and the girl are murdered. And he finds the people who did the murder, these two Mormon guys who both wanted to marry her. Oh no, that's not what happens. The dad is murdered. The daughter is kidnapped back, forced to marry one of the guys. I think has a kid, so is sexually assaulted, raped, and then has this kid, and then dies of sadness. Which to me is like, you just brought the sexism from peppered into 10 out of 10. You have used a woman and her sexual assault and then murder as a revenge motivation for a male character to do murder, which is one of my least favorite tropes that happens in books or movies or stories or whatever. So that was upsetting. And it was super upsetting because unlike a lot of other stories where that happens, this girl was not a throwaway person, a character, and she was not weak. She was pretty badass and interesting and kind of a full character, and we got to see her as a kid, and she was cool, and like I liked her, and I knew it was going to happen. I was like, how are we going to connect these two things? It's going to be a motivation. What's the motivation going to be? It's going to be something horrible happened to a woman and she got killed. So I knew it was going to happen, but there was a tiny part of me that was hoping like maybe somehow it won't. Maybe somehow she won't get killed, or maybe only the dad will get murdered. That would be great if it could be just the dad. right. But I knew it wasn't going to be that. But I feel like this could use this book could use a rewrite. Maybe it could be really great if it had a rewrite. So that was upsetting. Is there anything else I wanted to say about this? Yeah, so that's the motivation. Then the guy follows these two guys. I don't even remember why they were in Britain, but he follows them to London and then murders them. Okay, did I have anything else to say about this part? Oh, one other thing is that guy who's supposed to be like the really tough macho lover guy who then does the murder revenge, he fainted from sadness when he figured out that the dad died. And again, just like when I was saying the men talking about their depression surprised me, that shocked me. I was not prepared for the book to have like a very macho man faint, and I thought that was cool. I want more books where men faint from emotions. Okay, I guess I'll just read some lines that I liked, and then that'll basically be it. Yeah, lots of anti-indigenous little racist things here. Some writing I liked. When the man's falling asleep, the dad's falling asleep with the little girl when they think they're gonna die, until the man's grizzled beard was mixed with the golden tresses of his companion. Like I said, of course she's blonde, but still, it's beautiful. Yeah, they definitely seem to think we're Jesus freaks. Well, they did anyway. Or at least this one author did. Don't want to generalize. This was just showing, I underlined this because it's just showing like how much the author is upset with and recognizes the cult-like nature of the Mormon Church. So he says, there was no escape from this invisible network which was drawn all around them. And then again a little later, be quick, the very rocks have ears and the trees have eyes. Which actually reminded me of a line from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is fantasy, and this is based in real life, so it's not, the Mormon Church is real life, or was, whatever, you know what I'm saying. The point is it's extra scary that it reminds me of a fantasy book, because, that those are things that happen in real life. Okay, I guess that's all I really have to say. Overall, I really liked the first half of the book, even despite its very in-your-face issues, and I could quickly see why people really like Sherlock Holmes. I think I am going to read more, unlike Agatha Christie, who I'm retiring forever, but this book didn't really work, because, to me, it wasn't very good, because the second half of it didn't make any sense it did make sense, but it just felt so disjointed and random with the first half, and just like an excuse for the author to just rant about something that was obviously bothering him and weighing heavy on his mind, which is cool, and it was seemingly very needed, but just didn't fit with the book at all. And the tonal shift was bizarre, and did not work for me. But it made me, I want to read more. So yeah. Alright. Bye, everyone.